tell you this is taller.
Yes.
A lot taller.
Yeah, that's good. I got this one. Does it work in that base or do you want this base, the same base?
Hey, everybody on press. Let's just check levels one more time. Hey, hey, 1, 2. Check podium. Press in front, I'm not the mayor. Is everybody good on camera with levels? Check 1, 2. Hey, hey. 1, 2. Check. I'm seeing a couple thumbs. Hey, hey. 1, 2. Camera on the left. I guess you're good.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
When you were a little kid and you thought about what you wanted to be, teaching was at the top of your list. But things changed. And as you got older, teaching didn't seem like the best option anymore. So you're thinking you'll be something else. But what would your 12-year-old self say? Now you want to be a doctor. You don't think teachers save lives? 25 at a time. An actress? Try playing a different role every time the bell rings. How about a scientist? Ever heard of physics? Chemistry? Who do you think teaches that? Teachers today are breaking down obstacles, finding innovative ways to instill old lessons, and taking learning far beyond the four walls of the classroom. It's time to recognize that great things are happening in teaching and put it back on your list. Don't try to convince yourself otherwise. You had it right the first time.
Find out how you can make more at teach.org. Make more. Teach. Brought to you by Teach and the Ad Council.
La ley de pago por ausencia laboral debido a enfermedad ya está en vigencia. Ciertos empleadores ahora deben permitirles a sus trabajadores ausentarse por causas de enfermedad, sea para cuidar de sí mismos o de algún miembro de su familia. Los empleadores y los trabajadores pueden llamar al 311 o buscar Paid Sick Leave en la página web nyc.gov para encontrar el aviso requerido para los empleados, páginas de información general, respuestas a preguntas frecuentes y eventos de adiestramiento. Esta ley protege la salud de los trabajadores y mantiene los negocios fuertes.
Have you ever either wanted to get in or out of your driveway only to discover that a stranger's car or truck is blocking it?
How do I report a vehicle blocking my driveway?
All drivers with a valid New York license are taught that blocking a driveway is a violation. In fact, the Department of Motor Vehicles states that you cannot park in a driveway, period. And yet the problem persists. So instead of doing something rash, register your complaint by contacting 311. There you could file a report letting them know that your driveway is being blocked. Or you could contact your local police precinct. Cars can be ticketed and towed. And if that happens, the perp will pay. Because fines are steep. It won't be cheap.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
With more than 8 million people living in the city, there's a whole lot of garbage and recyclables to collect. So to keep things running smoothly, there's a timetable for pickups in all 5 boroughs.
What is my garbage and recycling pickup schedule?
Your pickup day and time depends on where you live in the city. To find out, simply go to nyc.gov and search Refuse Collection Schedule. But remember, you won't be seeing that garbage truck on city holidays. Really bad weather, like a snow or ice storm, which can make getting around tough, can also mean delays or cancellations. And it's not just your wardrobe that changes with the seasons. Pickup times do too. Just go to the website to find out when to take out your trash and recyclables, and when to remove your empty bins from the curb. How do I find a police precinct or police service area based on name or address?
Each neighborhood across the 5 boroughs has a specific police precinct assigned to it, and it can be very helpful to know which one is closest to you.
If you're trying to locate a police precinct or one of the 9 public housing police service areas, also known as a PSA, there are 2 ways to find the information on your computer. Log on and go to nyc.gov. Type in police precinct to find it by name, or type in find your precinct to locate it by address.
I'm Shirlane McCrae, the First Lady of New York City. As a parent, I believe that all our children must receive the best education possible, as early as possible, and this begins with a high-quality pre-K program. It's a historic time in our city. We are expanding high-quality, full-day pre-K options across all boroughs. Families of children born in 2010 can apply for free pre-K now. Public school applications are due on April 23rd. Families interested in our community-based organization, Pre-K Options, should contact those programs to apply. Together, let's give our 4-year-olds a great start for life today. For more information, visit schools.nyc.gov/pre-K.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
This is the sound of a brand new outdoor grill being hurled off a 20-story building. Now a stylish glass coffee table. An electric guitar. These are the things you could enjoy, all cast into oblivion. Because when you throw away money on wasted electricity, you throw away everything you could have bought with it. Visit EnergySavers.gov and get tips on how to save energy and money. Then do things like switch to Energy Star light bulbs or Energy Star appliances, and you could save hundreds of dollars a year. So this doesn't happen to the recliner you've had your eye on, or this to the treadmill on your wish list, or this to the shiny new bike your kid's been asking for. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Ad Council.
Did you know that New York City has a store? Well, it does. It's the City Store, the official store for the City of New York, where you can find everything from gifts and collectibles to municipal publications like the Green Book, and including a diverse collection of books about New York. So come to the City Store, located in the North Plaza of the Municipal Building. For more information, dial 311 or visit www.nyc.gov.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
How do I get water and sewer bill information?
When clean New York City water comes out of your tap, it's part of a system that supplies over 9 million people. The Department of Environmental Protection's website is a fast, easy, and convenient way to view and pay your water bill. Go to nyc.gov and search DEP Ways to Pay Your Bill. There you can look at water usage and spot leaks and water waste that can cost you money. If you want to pay your bill by mail, phone, or in person, you'll need your account number located on the upper left side of your water bill. You can pay by phone by calling 866-622-8292, or you can pay in person by visiting a DEP borough office.
Under New York City's paid sick leave law, certain employers must now allow sick leave so employees can care for themselves or a family member. Employers and employees can call 311 or visit nyc.gov and search paid sick leave for the required notice for employees, one-page overviews, FAQs, and training events. Together we can keep businesses strong and keep New Yorkers healthy.
Sometimes just mentioning the word taxes sends people running for cover. It can be an overwhelming topic. And if you're a homeowner, understanding property tax is just one more thing on a long to-do list.
How do I get help understanding my property tax account?
If you have questions about your property taxes or your account bill from finance, there's help available. Log on to the finance section of nyc.gov. Here you can check your balance, estimate future taxes, and make a payment. There's also a list of frequently asked questions to answer or explain even the smallest problem, like how to replace your bill, how to pay online, or how to change your mailing address. Don't see your particular question? Contact the Department of Finance by email, traditional mail, or by contacting 311.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
If you've paid your parking ticket and are having a problem with the payment process, you can find help.
How do I get help with parking ticket payment problems?
Say, for example, you're owed a refund. If you're the registered owner of the car, the finance department will automatically issue a check for the overpayment within 30 days. If you're not the registered owner of the vehicle, procedures may be different, so make sure you save your tickets, payments, and tow receipts. Log on to the finance section of nyc.gov, click on refunds, and follow the instructions. You can file online or download a form to mail in later. Still can't find a solution to your problem? Contact 311 and a representative from the Department of Finance will get back to you.
Today might be the day I drop out of school. Today could be the last day I try. My parents alone can't stop me. My friends can't even stop me. But you might be able to. With United Way, you could tutor me, be my mentor, or volunteer to just read with me. If someone had helped me earlier, I might not be struggling. And studies prove that kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. There are tons of ways people like you can help kids like me stay in school. And United Way is calling for you to be one of them. Because it takes 12 years to create a graduate. It takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between me becoming one or the other could be you. Make me a success, not a statistic.
Take the pledge to volunteer now at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Getting a parking ticket isn't fun, but it happens. It's best to deal with it right away, but if you've put it off, you'll need to find out where you stand.
How do I check the status of a parking ticket online?
You can check the status of your ticket online by logging on to the Department of Finance at nyc.gov. Just enter the ticket information or your license plate number. You can find out how much you owe or whether a ticket is in judgment. If you can't find your ticket online, don't panic. A printed ticket status is usually available within 4 days, and a handwritten ticket can take up to 3 weeks to be posted. Not contesting the ticket? Just use a major credit card to pay the fine online. Find it, pay it, and forget it.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
When you were a little kid and you thought about what you wanted to be, teaching was at the top of your list. But things changed. And as you got older, teaching didn't seem like the best option anymore. So you're thinking you'll be something else. But what would your 12-year-old self say? Now you want to be a doctor. You don't think teachers save lives? 25 at a time. An actress? Try playing a different role every time the bell rings. How about a scientist? Ever heard of physics? Chemistry? Who do you think teaches that? Teachers today are breaking down obstacles, finding innovative ways to instill old lessons, and taking learning far beyond the four walls of the classroom. It's time to recognize that great things are happening in teaching and put it back on your list. Don't try to convince yourself otherwise. You had it right the first time.
Find out how you can make more at teach.org. Make more. Teach. Brought to you by Teach and the Ad Council.
La ley de pago por ausencia laboral debido a enfermedad ya está en vigencia. Ciertos empleadores ahora deben permitirles a sus trabajadores ausentarse por causas de enfermedad, sea para cuidar de sí mismos o de algún miembro de su familia. Los empleadores y los trabajadores pueden llamar al 311 o buscar Paid Sick Leave en la página web nyc.gov para encontrar el aviso requerido para los empleados, páginas de información general, respuestas a preguntas frecuentes y eventos de adiestramiento. Esta ley protege la salud de los trabajadores y mantiene los negocios fuertes.
Have you ever either wanted to get in or out of your driveway only to discover that a stranger's car or truck is blocking it?
How do I report a vehicle blocking my driveway?
All drivers with a valid New York license are taught that blocking a driveway is a violation. In fact, the Department of Motor Vehicles states that you cannot park in a driveway, period. And yet the problem persists. So instead of doing something rash, register your complaint by contacting 311. There you could file a report letting them know that your driveway is being blocked, or you could contact your local police precinct. Cars can be ticketed and towed, and if that happens, the perp will pay, because fines are steep. It won't be cheap.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
With more than 8 million people living in the city, there's a whole lot of garbage and recyclables to collect. So to keep things running smoothly, there's a timetable for pickups in all 5 boroughs.
What is my garbage and recycling pickup schedule?
Your pickup day and time depends on where you live in the city. To find out, simply go to nyc.gov and search Refuse Collection Schedule. But remember, you won't be seeing that garbage truck on city holidays. Really bad weather, like a snow or ice storm, which can make getting around tough, can also mean delays or cancellations. And it's not just your wardrobe that changes with the seasons, pickup times do too. Just go to the website to find out when to take out your trash and recyclables, and when to remove your empty bins from the curb. How do I find a police precinct or police service area based on name or address?
Each neighborhood across the 5 boroughs has a specific police precinct assigned to it, and it can be very helpful to know which one is closest to you.
If you're trying to locate a police precinct or one of the 9 public housing police service areas, also known as a PSA, there are 2 ways to find the information on your computer. Log on and go to nyc.gov. Type in police precinct to find it by name, or type in find your precinct to locate it by address.
I'm Shirlane McCrae, the First Lady of New York City. As a parent, I believe that all our children must receive the best education possible, as early as possible, and this begins with a high-quality pre-K program. It's a historic time in our city. We are expanding high-quality, full-day pre-K options across all boroughs. Families of children born in 2010 can apply for free pre-K now. Public school applications are due on April 23rd. Families interested in our community-based organization, Pre-K Options, should contact those programs to apply. Together, let's give our 4-year-olds a great start for life today. For more information, visit schools.nyc.gov/pre-K.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
This is the sound of a brand new outdoor grill being hurled off a 20-story building. Now a stylish glass coffee table. An electric guitar. These are the things you could enjoy, all cast into oblivion. Because when you throw away money on wasted electricity, you throw away everything you could have bought with it. Visit EnergySavers.gov and get tips on how to save energy and money. Then do things like switch to Energy Star light bulbs or Energy Star appliances, and you could save hundreds of dollars a year. So this doesn't happen to the recliner you've had your eye on, or this to the treadmill on your wish list, or this to the shiny new bike your kid's been asking for. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Ad Council.
Did you know that New York City has a store? Well, it does. It's the City Store, the official store for the City of New York, where you can find everything from gifts and collectibles to municipal publications like the Green Book, and including a diverse collection of books about New York. So come to the City Store, located in the North Plaza of the Municipal Building. For more information, dial 311 or visit www.nyc.gov.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
How do I get water and sewer bill information?
When clean New York City water comes out of your tap, it's part of a system that supplies over 9 million people. The Department of Environmental Protection's website is a fast, easy, and convenient way to view and pay your water bill. Go to nyc.gov and search DEP Ways to Pay Your Bill. There you can look at water usage and spot leaks and water waste that can cost you money. If you want to pay your bill by mail, phone, or in person, you'll need your account number located on the upper left side of your water bill. You can pay by phone by calling 866-622-8292, or you can pay in person by visiting a DEP borough office.
Under New York City's paid sick leave law, certain employers must now allow sick leave so employees can care for themselves or a family member. Employers and employees can call 311 or visit nyc.gov and search paid sick leave for the required notice for employees, one-page overviews, FAQs, and training events. Together we can keep businesses strong and keep New Yorkers healthy.
Sometimes just mentioning the word taxes sends people running for cover. It can be an overwhelming topic. And if you're a homeowner, understanding property tax is just one more thing on a long to-do list.
How do I get help understanding my property tax account?
If you have questions about your property taxes or your account bill from finance, there's help available. Log on to the finance section of nyc.gov. Here you can check your balance, estimate future taxes, and make a payment. There's also a list of frequently asked questions to answer or explain even the smallest problem, like how to replace your bill, how to pay online, or how to change your mailing address. Don't see your particular question? Contact the Department of Finance by email, traditional mail, or by contacting 311.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
If you've paid your parking ticket and are having a problem with the payment process, you can find help.
How do I get help with parking ticket payment problems?
Say, for example, you're owed a refund. If you're the registered owner of the car, the finance department will automatically issue a check for the overpayment within 30 days. If you're not the registered owner of the vehicle, procedures may be different, so make sure you save your tickets, payments, and tow receipts. Log on to the finance section of nyc.gov, click on refunds, and follow the instructions. You can file online or download a form to mail in later. Still can't find a solution to your problem? Contact 311 and a representative from the Department of Finance will get back to you.
Today might be the day I drop out of school. Today could be the last day I try. My parents alone can't stop me. My friends can't even stop me. But you might be able to.
With United Way, you could tutor me, be my mentor, or volunteer to just read with me. If someone had helped me earlier, I might not be struggling. And studies prove that kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. There are tons of ways people like you can help kids like me stay in school. And United Way is calling for you to be one of them. Because it takes 12 years to create a graduate. It takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between me becoming one or the other could be you. Make me a success, not a statistic.
Take the pledge to volunteer now at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Getting a parking ticket isn't fun, but it happens. It's best to deal with it right away, but if you've put it off, you'll need to find out where you stand.
How do I check the status of a parking ticket online?
You can check the status of your ticket online by logging on to the Department of Finance at nyc.gov. Just enter the ticket information or your license plate number. You can find out how much you owe or whether a ticket is in judgment. If you can't find your ticket online, don't panic. A printed ticket status is usually available within 4 days, and a handwritten ticket can take up to 3 weeks to be posted. Not contesting the ticket? Just use a major credit card to pay the fine online. Find it, pay it, and forget it.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
When you were a little kid and you thought about what you wanted to be, teaching was at the top of your list. But things changed. And as you got older, teaching didn't seem like the best option anymore. So you're thinking you'll be something else. But what would your 12-year-old self say? Now you want to be a doctor. You don't think teachers save lives? 25 at a time. An actress? Try playing a different role every time the bell rings. How about a scientist? Ever heard of physics? Chemistry? Who do you think teaches that? Teachers today are breaking down obstacles, finding innovative ways to instill old lessons, and taking learning far beyond the four walls of the classroom. It's time to recognize that great things are happening in teaching and put it back on your list. Don't try to convince yourself otherwise. You had it right the first time.
Find out how you can make more at teach.org. Make more. Teach. Brought to you by Teach and the Ad Council.
La ley de pago por ausencia laboral debido a enfermedad ya está en vigencia. Ciertos empleadores ahora deben permitirles a sus trabajadores ausentarse por causas de enfermedad, sea para cuidar de sí mismos o de algún miembro de su familia. Los empleadores y los trabajadores pueden llamar al 311 o buscar Paid Sick Leave en la página web nyc.gov para encontrar el aviso requerido para los empleados, páginas de información general, respuestas a preguntas frecuentes y eventos de adiestramiento. Esta ley protege la salud de los trabajadores y mantiene los negocios fuertes.
Have you ever either wanted to get in or out of your driveway only to discover that a stranger's car or truck is blocking it?
How do I report a vehicle blocking my driveway?
All drivers with a valid New York license are taught that blocking a driveway is a violation. In fact, the Department of Motor Vehicles states that you cannot park in a driveway, period. And yet the problem persists. So instead of doing something rash, register your complaint by contacting 311. There you could file a report letting them know that your driveway is being blocked. Or you could contact your local police precinct. Cars can be ticketed and towed. And if that happens, the perp will pay. Because fines are steep. It won't be cheap.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
With more than 8 million people living in the city, there's a whole lot of garbage and recyclables to collect. So to keep things running smoothly, there's a timetable for pickups in all 5 boroughs.
What is my garbage and recycling pickup schedule?
Your pickup day and time depends on where you live in the city. To find out, simply go to nyc.gov and search Refuse Collection Schedule. But remember, you won't be seeing that garbage truck on city holidays. Really bad weather, like a snow or ice storm, which can make getting around tough, can also mean delays or cancellations. And it's not just your wardrobe that changes with the seasons, pickup times do too. Just go to the website to find out when to take out your trash and recyclables, and when to remove your empty bins from the curb. How do I find a police precinct or police service area based on name or address?
Each neighborhood across the 5 boroughs has a specific police precinct assigned to it, and it can be very helpful to know which one is closest to you.
If you're trying to locate a police precinct or one of the 9 public housing police service areas, also known as a PSA, there are 2 ways to find the information on your computer. Log on and go to nyc.gov. Type in police precinct to find it by name, or type in find your precinct to locate it by address.
I'm Shirlane McCrae, the First Lady of New York City. As a parent, I believe that all our children must receive the best education possible, as early as possible, and this begins with a high-quality pre-K program. It's a historic time in our city. We are expanding high-quality, full-day pre-K options across all boroughs. Families of children born in 2010 can apply for free pre-K now. Public school.
I just want to first say I'm thrilled to be joined by Dan Zarilli, who's running our Recovery and Resiliency Office, and Sharif Solomon, who runs the Legislative Office for the City of New York in Albany. Let me just say up front that it was very gratifying today to be here for the awards ceremony for the projects from Staten Island and from southern Brooklyn. These are areas I've spent a lot of time in since Sandy hit. I think community leaders have really put together great ideas for recovery and resiliency, and I was thrilled to see this additional support going to them. I was also thrilled to hear the really innovative ideas coming out of the Rockaways, coming out of Red Hook, things I'll certainly be following up on. And I want to say, especially, one of my chief reasons for being here today was to promote the property tax relief legislation that we're putting forward for homeowners who have rebuilt, who were devastated by Sandy, have rebuilt, and we want to make sure will not be penalized because they were able over a year and a half to finally get themselves back on their feet. We don't want to have them hit with yet another challenge of a sudden increase in their property tax bill. Really appreciate Governor Cuomo's support for that legislation. Appreciate the support we're getting, bipartisan support throughout the legislature. We're very, very optimistic that legislation will pass in the near term. So this is something that's going to be important for a lot of New Yorkers who are finally getting back on their feet after Sandy. With that, can I take questions first on anything Sandy related, and then we'll be happy to do any other topics. Thank you. Yes. Well, it's for folks who have now rebuilt, and because of the rebuilding, their assessment would go up, and therefore their property tax would go up. In other words, the property would be treated under current tax law as an improved property, a more valuable property. Bang, they'd be hit with a tax increase. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. Folks who have finally gotten their homes back together did it after immense struggle and, in most cases, immense personal expense, and we want to make sure they're not set back yet again. So this legislation will give them immediate relief. Again, we are very appreciative of the support of the governor. It's crucial. The support of the legislative leaders has been very generous and quick in coming. So we feel very good about getting this passed quickly so that we can get relief to people right away. I'm sorry, again? It's drafted. We're working out the final arrangements for introduction and sponsorship, and that will be happening in the coming days. Well, first of all, I want to say I've been talking constantly to folks at HUD. My staff has been talking constantly. This is literally a day-to-day relationship. We're constantly in touch on a variety of things we're doing together. Now, I think some of the press reports have portrayed the possibility of a change in policy, but there really has not been a change yet. There's not. We've very carefully discussed this with HUD. We've looked at what they've said formally. There has not been a change. What I said the other day, I stand by. I think it's self-evident that the original legislation was meant to provide assistance to people in New York State and New Jersey who were devastated by Sandy, and then aid the resiliency efforts going forward. I think that's self-evident. I think that's what's ultimately going to determine the outcomes, and I feel good about where it's going. But most importantly, I don't want to ever say that HUD took a step when they didn't take it. HUD, in our working with them, has been entirely supportive and cooperative. Anything else on the tax plan or anything else on Sandy?
Yeah. Are you confident that the property tax legislation is going to get passed before these tax bills go out?
Let me speak carefully because I think it's important when there's a lot of moving parts to not overstate. I feel very optimistic about this legislation being passed, certainly in this immediate legislative session, meaning by the end of June at latest. I'm hopeful, for the soonest possible date. And I think the kind of support we've seen so far suggests we have a good shot at an early date. We're going to immediately then act to amend the property tax bills for those individuals. But either way you slice it, the same amount of money will be returned to their hands, regardless of whether the legislation were passed in May or June. the same amount of money will be refunded to the individual homeowners.
The legislation that's being drafted, would that apply outside of New York City as well?
This is for the city of New York only, and we think it's crucial considering how many people had their homes destroyed in New York City.
How long was the abatement last?
Well, we're starting with 1 year, and then we'll come back around at the end of that time frame and see where things are.
There's a story out today that there's a controversy in the 9/11 Museum over a film that explains Al-Qaeda and it mentions jihad and I think Islamism. And some people are saying that this film should be pulled. I was wondering if you're familiar with it and you have any thoughts on it.
No, I'm not familiar with it, so I'll just be careful about not commenting on something I don't know the details of.
Mr. Mayor, the Brooklyn DA sent out an internal memo saying they won't prosecute people who are caught smoking marijuana unless they have a prior already, and that includes those who are caught smoking down the street. Rank and file PD say that they're going to do what the commissioner tells them to do. You aware of that memo?
I've just heard of it. I haven't seen the memo. I haven't seen the details. Look, my position has been historically that I think there's areas that need immediate reform. I supported legislation. I know the governor supported it intensely to no longer have a criminal penalty for the display of a small amount of marijuana. I think that's a common sense change we have to make. Certainly our focus has been, Commissioner Bratton's focus has been, as going after serious crime. And we've moved away from some of the policies that I think were unfortunately creating a rift between police and community, but also taking a lot of time and energy away from addressing serious crime. Obviously, the reforms we made in stop and frisk and other areas. So I need to see the details. I think the district attorney has some of the same concerns that I have and Commissioner Bratton have about the history here. But before I comment on the details of his proposal, I'd have to see the actual memo.
Mayor, how would you characterize your relationship with the governor right now, and how would you characterize your relationship with Albany as a whole, considering some of the scuffles you've had with legislation?
Well, life is long, and so what I'd say is, first of all, Governor and I, as I mentioned in the session, in about a year, it'll be 20 years of knowing each other, working with each other. We talk all the time. It's when you have a relationship of that depth and history, it doesn't matter if sometimes you disagree. There's plenty more things you agree on. He's been very willing to be helpful on the property tax relief. He's been very supportive in terms of the speed cameras and a number of other areas. So I feel very good about the working relationship, very good about our communication, the consistency of our communication. Look, I've said that when you look at everything that came out of the budget process, I feel great about what we were able to achieve for New York City, with the governor's help. And it didn't matter if there were some differences along the way. In the end, the funding is there for pre-K. The preventative measures to stop homelessness are being moved. The rent cap for HIV and AIDS, which is a crucial initiative for us. All of those pieces happening now. So from my point of view, I always say the product is what you really need to measure by. But in terms of product, this relationship's in a very good place.
Mr. Mayor, how much did campaign spending and campaign donations by the NY class affect your positions on the parish board?
It did not, and I have to tell you, the attempts to stereotype the way any individual thinks, that bothers me for a lot of people when it's about me or about anyone else. I've spoken very, very publicly on this. I said I used to believe that the horse carriages were a New York City tradition and they should be kept just the way they were. This is going back, 6 years. And I talked to folks who represented the animal rights movement when I was in the city council, even before I was public advocate. And they would constantly make the point what these horses experienced, the whole concept of what a more humane society should be. And little by little, I started to feel that my previous position had been wrong. And I've articulated that trajectory all along. So I have to tell you, when this debate comes up and I say to people, just think for a moment, what are horses doing in the middle of Manhattan traffic, midtown Manhattan traffic? Is that really the best way to go about things? Is that a humane reality for those horses? Is that good for anyone? I don't have a lot of people arguing with me on that. I understand some people have an industry that they want to defend, but on the common sense issue, should we have horses working in the middle of Manhattan traffic? I think it's pretty evident we shouldn't. As I said, that is something I came to my views on long before this last campaign and long before anyone donated to me.
Mr. Mayor, the Fiscal Policy Institute says that the city has enough money to pay for retroactive pay raises for labor unions. Do you agree with that? Is there enough money in the city?
It's continuity with the things we've talked about before. We have a profound fiscal challenge. The part that was missed, I think, in a lot of the civic discourse I talked about the day we did the preliminary budget is this city government has had a structural deficit year after year. Each time enough money came out of the previous year to keep the year ahead solvent, but it wasn't a true balance. A true balance is when you have enough revenue coming in a given year to pay your expenses. We haven't had that for a long time. We don't have that projected going forward. Fiscal 16, for example, already has a $1 billion running deficit. So that is the first problem, a structural deficit over years. Second, we know there's a lot of unpredictable realities with the federal government, a lot of challenges, some of which are going to be felt in the coming years because of some of the big changes that have happened on the federal level. And so what I've said about the labor negotiations is, one, of course, it's private. The details are private and respectful, but that the only way we address some of the concerns raised by our partners in municipal labor is if we find cost savings. And that's been very clear throughout the process. So anything that any individual union wants to achieve has to come with substantial cost savings attached.
Last question, guys.
Yeah, go ahead. You have a follow. Hold on.
That sounds like you're saying no. There is not currently enough money in the city's budget to fund retroactive.
It's abundantly clear that take the whole package, retro, some of the raises that have been asked for going forward, and other things. Right now, we're in a structural deficit with our current staffing dynamics. So if you're going to add to them, by definition, it would only mean a bigger deficit. So by definition, you have to find cost savings. Whoa, one at a time. Let's do that. Yeah. Well, on the school lunches, I believe the goal is the right one. There's a couple of wrinkles here. One, as we've looked into this further, are concerned that it may have a boomerang effect in terms of denying us a certain amount of federal funding. So we need to understand what the economics are. We're working on that right now. We've been very clear with the advocates that that's an open question that until we resolve it, we can't move forward. Second, let's say that problem was resolved favorably. It's still a major expenditure. It's a good thing to invest in, but it's a major expenditure. The problem is, we are 2 weeks away now from the executive budget. A lot of things have to be resolved. We're going to have to make a series of tough choices. In some cases, we're going to be able to focus and prioritize some things. Other things will have to be phased in over time. Some things are going to move fast. Some things are going to have to wait. That whole discussion will be laid out on May 8th. But in the meantime, we have to understand better these federal funding dynamics. Please, yeah. Look, I've felt this for a while. I've been asked about it many times. You can imagine in the entire 2013 campaign, this question came up many, many times. I think with the force we have right now, we're doing a great job. I give tremendous respect to the men and women of the NYPD and, of course, to Commissioner Bratton. They're doing an extraordinary job. Crime remains low, and let me give them additional credit for continuing the healing process between police and community. So the resources we have now are getting the job done, and we're in a structural deficit. So I am not in the business of adding to that deficit when I believe we can get the job done with the resources and the personnel we have now. Thanks, everyone.